bandwidth is
Okay,
what
there.
it should be.
Go.
Again, starting live from the studios of the Cuban Heritage Foundation in Las Vegas, Nevada. This is Way to Go. I am Maria Caminero with Dr. Annette Tejero and Eric in the middle. Today we're going to continue a conversation that we started 2 weeks ago with regards to immigration. But before we go there, we want to talk a little bit about the foundation itself. We would like to be able to share with you what it is that we're doing here at our foundation. We're pretty much set in the heart of the Las Vegas area community, and we are basically here to share our culture with the locals and with visitors. We have gotten visitors here from California, from New York, from Florida, and everybody's welcome to visit the Cuban Heritage Foundation. You'll find a lot of interesting things here. But what I really want to share with you is what we really do here. Right now, we are working very hard to help newcomers to be able to integrate into the American society. This is a very tough task. It requires a lot of energy, it requires funding, it requires everybody's help. So you are more than welcome to go to our donate button and please help us out on this task. The vast majority of the newcomers are coming from Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and yes, Colombia. And in order to get here, they're going through jungles and rivers, and they're basically exposing themselves to assaults and rapes and cartels, just horrible, horrible situations in order to make it to the United States. We also seek to educate them, to help them become integrating into our society and in order to become productive citizens to this country. We teach them things such as the Constitution, economics, government, civics, English, which is very important. So we're really here to help our community be better. The Cuban Heritage Foundation began back in 2013, and we were pretty much strictly a cultural organization, but that has changed since then, being that the Cuban population has most definitely grown here in Las Vegas. And right now, there is a really, really big need to help immigrants. So we're here to help anybody that needs our help. And we hope that if you're ever here in Las Vegas or if you need our help for anything, that you know where we're at. We're at 3430 East Flamingo Road, Suite 324. And you're more than welcome to call myself. My number is 702-813-1448 with any questions you might have regarding the foundation or if you would like to schedule a visit. With that, we're going to go ahead and continue our show, which is called Why Do They Come? Just to recap a little bit about what we spoke about 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the reasons why you see this huge influx of immigrants coming into this country right now. The number one reason, of course, is because they can. Our borders are pretty much open to whoever wants to come right now. Ever since the Biden administration took power back in 2021, we've had over 4 million illegal immigrants enter the country. We want to stress that we are not anti-immigrants by any means. We understand why people come, And they are not coming because of climate change or any of those things that you have heard on TV and that you have heard from people that should know better. But they are coming because they are basically fleeing communism. That's number one. And basically, they're fleeing countries that, because of communism, um, they don't work, they don't function correctly. Communism has a way of destroying absolutely everything. They pretty much disguise life under socialism. They want to call it socialism. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And eventually, everybody is equally miserable. And when everybody's equally miserable, what they seek more than anything is an exit. And where do they want to exit to? They want to exit to a country where they feel that they're going to have, number one, freedom to speak, freedom of movement, and freedom to become something, to do something with their lives, and not be controlled in every shape, way, or form. And so the vast majority of the people that we're seeing come into this country right now are coming for these reasons. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Annette so that she can share some of her findings with you.
So we spoke about the fact that we needed to find solutions to some of these problems because people are not appearing at our border because we're doing everything right. And they're also not appearing at our border because it's a sudden influx, that COVID created this sudden influx, or that climate change created this sudden influx. The changes that we're talking about have taken decades. And one of the things that people look at is we need to start putting our money where our mouth is. So if we are going to be the number one country in the world, if we're going to be the beacon of freedom, which is what we profess to be, then we need to do business and put our money with people to encourage them to be good neighbors. There's no way that you can be good neighbors with people if you set up barriers to being good with your good neighbors and then set up like an open door policy with people that are bad neighbors. It fascinated me when I did some of the research that we did for this particular podcast, because I always believe in following the money. So when I started to research where it is that American commerce is at, you look that Americans don't necessarily do business with countries that we want to create alliances or have good free trade with. We have a huge amount of our trade goes with China, and it's in the negative. We're talking about in 2020, $310.3 billion that when you take in what we export to China and what they import, China's still ahead by that much money. When we buy these things in foreign countries that don't necessarily believe in human rights, they don't believe in having opportunities for different people. They believe in 17-hour work weeks. They believe in working 6 or 7 days. They believe in housing their workers so that they can't leave the factory, almost like in a prison type manner. But either way that you look at it, do we really as Americans want to have our goods and services sold to or bought from these kinds of countries? Don't we want to endear countries that actually have free market principles? Don't we want to inherently change the world around us? Why aren't we focusing on the Western Hemisphere? And when I looked, there's not very much that we're doing in the Western Hemisphere. There's not that much positive import and export that we're doing. So are we financially crippling people so that people are coming to our borders because we're creating financial devastation?
I think that you are making a great point right now, Annette, because I have always said that our lack of engagement with Latin America would eventually create chaos. So our foreign policy with regards to our own hemisphere has been a total failure. I think that if we would have engaged in this hemisphere a lot heavier, especially, dating back to the times, for instance, that Bill Clinton was in office after he created NAFTA, I think that that would have been a great opportunity, not just to create, that relationship between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. We had a great opportunity to build a relationship with the vast majority of Latin America. Because what happens is when people do not have hope, it is very, very easy to fall into the wrong types of situations. And there are very, very smart people, like Fidel Castro, for instance, that is very, very convincing. This man was able to infiltrate not only people, but also his communistic ideas throughout Latin America because many people felt that they didn't have opportunities. Some of these countries lack the infrastructure, they lack the factory and the manufacturing. And I think that it would have been a very good opportunity for the United States to actually go into Latin America, just like we did in China, and open shop and help these people so that in turn they didn't look at us as this big, great giant that was only there to take advantage of everyone. Uh, People should never see Americans in that way. And because of our foreign policy failures, that is exactly how they see us. So many people that are coming into this country are coming into this country thinking that, yes, I want to be in America because I can grow and I have opportunities. But
Well,
by the same token, America could have probably helped me stay in my country.
so they have resentment. That's what we're looking at is so really what we talk about at the Cuban Heritage Foundation and what Maria and I and Eric have talked about is if you do not educate people as they're coming in these horrible, terrible conditions and educate them about what it means to be an American and what our laws are like, they will never either A, integrate well into our society, or B, they won't take these thought process and take them back to their country if they have to return. And I think that's where we failed. We failed financially because we reward bad behavior. In some of the times that we do have these foreign policy arrangements or trade agreements, we're handing money over to a corrupt regime and not to the people.
And I think it's also very important, that talking about relationships to try and do business with countries that are doing the right things. Now, this kind of all of what you both are saying at this point kind of reminds me of Nayib Bukele's interview with Tucker Carlson. I should invert that. Tucker Carlson's interview with Nayib Bukele back last year in 2021. And, Nayib Bukele presented very strong arguments, but he basically said what you two are both asserting right now, which is
just to intervene for a second. Bukele is the
president of El
Salvador, for those that don't know.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that he's been demonized in pretty much all forms of English language media, although in Spanish language circles, he's obviously looked at as a mixed figure, and there are certain things I disagree with about him, but he basically asserted that most people don't want to leave their country.
No, they don't.
And they would really prefer to live in their own country. But if they're kind of forced to, if they can't have economic security or physical security, they will try to leave. And Tucker Carlson gave a pretty good counter argument, which does seem to be what many people who are, native English speakers born and raised in the United States tend to say. He asked if the reason why they were coming might actually be economic benefits. And, yes, he did say that definitely is a large factor. But on the other hand, there are cons. You have to travel through gang-infested territory. You have to live a new language. You have to probably live in a place that doesn't have your food and your culture. It's definitely a mixed bag. So while there is some truth in the whole narrative that some people are coming in here for economic advantages or for certain types of welfare, honestly, that's a reductivist argument, in my opinion.
Well, I think we create the welfare.
Well, let's talk about that a little
Yeah.
bit, because I don't think a lot of our viewers may really understand the fact that when these immigrants get here, I don't care if you want to call them legal, undocumented, whatever you want to call them, there is no structure for them once they get in to work. They don't get a work permit.
Absolutely
So
not.
we're handing them over to our welfare system because they can't work. They won't be processed for work, which is outrageous to me. If they want to work, and we have American companies that want to hire them for their work ability, why would we let them in the country and then not let them work?
Well, especially at a time in this country where you almost have more job openings than people in a lot of places. So it's kind of like an oxymoron to be allowing so many people to come into the country only so that they can become a burden to the U.S. taxpayer. It's pure nonsense. Right above me here, you're going to see a web page. Some of the information that I am going to share with you comes directly out of this web page called FAIR US. That is the Federation for American Immigration Reform. If you look up here, this is a counter of daily illegal border crossings. This is how many people have crossed the border today. By the end of today, and actually by the end of this podcast, we are going to revisit that counter just so that you can see how the numbers grow and grow and grow by the minute. It is absolutely just crazy.
Well, it's
Yeah.
overwhelming. And we don't have the setup for getting these people processed to get them into our workforce.
I think it's also important to address that there's a lot of people around here, probably on both sides of the political spectrum, although more concentrated on one side, who will state, well, why can't they just wait in line? Why can't they just cross over here legally? Now, before we engage with that, I do want to bring up a few points. As you remember, back in February, there was a war that started with Ukraine. And this pointed stuff out to me that we're not just talking about people who are from Latin America here.
No.
There are, back in March, I actually shared this story on the podcast in passing, but there were a lot of people who were trying to come into the country through Tijuana, according to Thomson Reuters. It's the resources should be in the description of this video. But there were some anti-war Russians who were claiming asylum, who wanted to claim asylum, and whether or not their claims were valid, that's another question. But what they all constantly noticed was that they weren't being denied entry, but when Ukrainians came through, they were just waved through with an automatic 1-year pass. For instance, Irina Zolkina, math teacher who left Moscow with 4 children and her daughter's boyfriend, she was told by border agents after turning in all of her paperwork that she would have to wait. This is a woman who ended an anti-war protest on February 24th. She got arrested. She showed the video to Reuters. So apparently, but she definitely has a case, whether or not it would be considered valid to come in. But she was made to wait in Tijuana while a whole bunch of Ukrainians were allowed to be waved through. And it's not just Russians. We've got Venezuelans who have a claim. We've got, what we're seeing is a lot of people are jumping the line and going through the border because they know they have a very good claim to be in the United States. But at the same time, if they try to wait and do things the right way, they're going to be ignored.
And it could take 10 years. On average, anyone that you talk to that actually came here legally, it takes about a decade and a lot of money.
Well, and particularly in the case of Cuba, I think that we run into a little bit of a more desperate situation. Cubans are going without electricity for 12 hours, 14 hours, 18 hours. It's really unbelievable. There's really no food to speak of anymore. A country that was as productive as Cuba was, right now there's no food. The lack of freedom is unbelievable. I mean, they really hunt down, especially the younger people that are the ones that are the most vocal against the Cuban government today. They basically barely have freedom of movement. So it's really, really a bad situation. We've seen over 200,000 Cubans come since Biden took office. It's unbelievable. It's the largest Cuban exodus ever, and these people are living in pretty much desperate situations.
Well, and for those that wanted to believe Michael Moore's thing about, oh, Cuba has excellent health care and all these things, we're talking about power going out in a hospital. So if there's an intensive care facility and they have no backup generator that works, then we're talking about people that are on ventilators that can't be ventilated anymore, if there even is a ventilator in the hospital.
Well,
Yeah, I think
it's
a lot of people.
dire,
I think a lot of
dire.
people who live in the developed world really don't
No,
understand
they don't.
how absolutely devastating losing power, even for the space of a day, actually is.
Yeah.
We're talking about food in the freezer that goes bad, which is really bad in a place that is truly food insecure. Well, shoot, there's a
Exactly.
dearth of food there. While we're using buzzwords, Cuba and Venezuela are both food deserts. And when you buy a little bit of food that may be good quality at some, or good enough at some point, you put it in the fridge and the power goes out for 12 to 24 hours.
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
Well,
I mean,
and this affects so many other things. I mean, children are basically barely even going to school. So it's just a horrible situation in places like Nicaragua. Right now, you have priests in jail. I mean,
yeah, that whole government has come down hard, and it's been happening since 2018. So a lot of the changes that happen, they happen in episodes, which drives this massive exodus over and over again. So these aren't little problems. These aren't, oh well, these people just want to come here because they want to live better. We're talking about dire situations.
We're talking about situations where you really should consider this at the top. I mean, I know it's another country and you're tempted to think that another country doesn't affect you. But I think this crisis is really the proof that this should be on the top of your list of concerns. Now, long term, these crises are going to continue until these socialist nations are no more, and we put political pressure of some sort or another, serious political pressure of some sort or another, to actually resolve this. But in the meantime, I think this border crisis is a sign of something else. We constantly complain about illegal immigrants. As a society, we often complain about illegal immigrants crossing over the border illegally, and they need to follow and respect the law. And we all agree with this much.
absolutely.
However, one aspect that's almost never talked about is how much or how well the government follows the law. And this Martha's Vineyard incident, which we'll get into in a little bit. But before that, I think this is the ultimate proof that we created an absolute mess in our legal system about this. So,
and it's one that isn't being addressed, because now we're talking about decades of not addressing policy changes, not only immigration law, but policy changes that are so far behind the times that we may be exacerbating this massive influx rather than fixing it.
Well, exactly. And I think that our failure way back to not punish those countries, for instance, like Cuba, that has been a communist regime for 63 years. I think that the mere fact that we allowed for something like that to exist 90 miles away from American shores is atrocious. Everybody knows, it's no secret that when the United States wants to do something about any nation that they see fit to do something about, they go ahead and they do it, like we've done with Iraq and Afghanistan and many other countries. If I were to really analyze this at face value, I would almost call it regional racism. It makes you wonder how at a government level these government officials are actually looking at Latin America.
Well, they're ignoring it. It's almost like they throw a blind eye to that, and they would rather prop up.
But the question is why? Why is it that a Ukrainian can come into this country and not have to wait for anything?
No questions asked.
And no questions asked. I mean, we know they're beautiful and they're blonde and they have blue eyes, and yet the rest of these immigrants have to struggle so much over something that we could have probably had some type of influence in our own hemisphere.
I don't know if I would necessarily call it racism myself, but I do think that we tend to think of ourselves as a totally separate culture from many Latin American countries, and as a result, we tend to dismiss them as a people. And honestly, the more you read stories about Jose Marti, the Grito de Dolores, okay, you know, Mexico after its war for independence had bad government after bad government after bad government, but the ideals of classical liberalism existed there. Simon Bolivar, an absolutely amazing champion of liberty. I mean, even became an abolitionist before it took on in the United States. I mean, I want to say that he fought for the abolition of slavery around the same time that the British did. And yet we're never taught these stories in schools. But if we did, I think we would.
Blindness.
Yeah, I think if we did teach this stuff a little bit more in schools, even just a little bit more, we'd find that we have a lot more in common with these people than we do with other people. But instead, we tend to think of ourselves as a cultural island in this hemisphere.
We're separate. We don't necessarily look at anything south of the border as anything that would be even considered any kind of civilization that's equal. Interesting things, though, because I'm not trying to say that one political party does it better than another.
No.
For instance, when I was doing my research, I found it fascinating that we actually did more import and export commerce during the Bush years than we did even most recently and with Obama. So these things that are changing without, I'm going to say this, our news media even reporting on this stuff. And where we put our money as Americans, where we put our emphasis on helping or perhaps condoning certain, overlooking certain governments, it makes a huge impact on what happens as far as immigration.
Yeah, and I think the one thing is, and you know, we talk about a little bit about intervention trying to influence countries, and I'll tell you something, I'm not a big fan of foreign intervention myself as a libertarian, but I will also remind people who may be similarly ideological to me that liberty is a human concept. It's not merely an American concept, and particularly when people are connected by land to other people. I honestly don't think it's necessarily wrong for the United States to actually, and I mean, I'm not necessarily talking about the government. I mean, the government has done a lot of harm in Latin America in the past and the present, but I mean, the people really need to be pushing for these other people. We have a responsibility to do so.
And I think that we can't have a disconnect anymore. As a leading world figure that the United States is, we cannot continue to pick and choose outside countries that we make special bargains with and ignore the fact of what the potential is in Latin America. Latin America has a lot of the same resources that we had here as the United States, which made us a very strong country. Why wouldn't we want to fortify that rather than going to a completely communist country and having factory workers and everything working for us?
We got to
doesn't make any sense.
No, we got to determine what we truly stand for.
What do we stand for? Do we stand for human slavery, like that which is practiced in China, or do we stand for on our principles on human rights? And if we
freedom, I mean,
if we do, then we got to put our money where our mouth is.
All right, and I think we need to discuss a little bit recent events too. So
yes,
as everybody knows, on September 15th, Ron DeSantis sent, well, rather, I would say he forwarded a group of 50 migrants, most of whom were Venezuelans, to the small city and island of Martha's Vineyard recently. Now, according to some of my sources, they were forwarded from El Paso, Texas, and they stopped in Crestview, Florida, I want to say.
But
And
the links are provided, so.
yeah, the links are
people can look
provided.
at 'em.
Yeah, and they were, so they were dropped briefly in Crestview, Florida, at which point, according to Ron DeSantis, this is Ron DeSantis' story, according to his address at Emory-Riddle Aeronautical University 2 days later, that it was voluntary, and they were given a packet which included the map to Martha's Vineyard. And while some people did get confused, they thought they were being sent to New York or Boston, none of them really had a problem with being sent to Martha's Vineyard. Honestly, they got a long vacation, an all expenses paid trip to a very nice community, and the media's response was to absolutely explode and melt down.
But let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we need to talk about as Americans is jurisdiction. So when our federal government, that is the jurisdiction, they're the ones who have the jurisdiction over immigration, and they refuse to address the crisis at the border, and people are coming, as you will be able to see, over 5,000 people a day, then states have to provide all kinds of support services. So what a governor can do, because they can't play immigration, because that would be outside of their jurisdiction and they could be taken to court and stopped on those things, is a governor can, in the best interest of the people of his state, move these people somewhere where they can be taken care of, or perhaps there are more resources. Why can they do this? Because they're looking out for the best interests of their state constituents. But they can't pick and choose who it is that they send. And they offered these people voluntarily a place to go that might be better for them. So that's the best that a governor can do, because the governor right now, he can talk until he's blue in the face, and I think DeSantis has, and so has Governor Abbott, that this is out of control and that they don't have the infrastructure for this. So let's not condemn the governors for trying to do what's in the best interest of their state. Let's look, where should the buck stop?
Yeah,
The buck
where should
stops at the White House.
well where
The
should
buck stops at Capitol Hill.
yeah, where should the buck stop indeed? I mean, it's absolutely true that, people are trying to resolve a solution that has no problems at this point. And a lot of people are complaining. Now, let's think about this. The media did not care when these people were coming, and they were, and states like Arizona and Texas in particular had undue burden. They didn't even complain when they were being sent to, well, they complained a little bit. Muriel Bowser did complain a little bit when they were being sent to Washington, D.C. And on a slightly different but related note, nobody complained when the Biden administration shipped migrants to corners all over the United States under the cover of night as well, too, which is really no different. Actually, if anything, less consensual than what Ron DeSantis did, if you believe his side of the story. And yet, all they had to do was they had to drop 75 migrants in front of Kamala Harris's house and drop 50 Venezuelans off in Martha's Vineyard, who, by the way, were sent to Joint Base Cape Cod. Some people are saying within 24 hours. That's not quite correct. It was within 48 hours. I think one source I read said 44 hours to be specific. But in any case, it took that before this ever got any attention, and people were screaming that this was cruel. Well, honestly, I have to ask, are they screaming because they think this is cruel to the people who crossed into this country, or because this is cruel to the people, to them? I mean, one person, it's absolutely insane. I mean, one person even claimed that it was like the Holocaust.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
That's
It was,
horrific.
yeah, it was, yeah. And I'm not huge on complaining about this stuff. I mean, about comparing stuff to World War II. But I mean, on the other hand, if you actually talk to the people who were sent there, with a very small number of exceptions, according to Cristina Londoño, the Venezuelans were thankful to Ron DeSantis for sending them to such a nice place. The only people who did, and that's kind of a separate issue, their disputes more with the federal government. The few people who were complaining were the ones who claimed that they crossed in a valid way and they were trying to argue their case, but instead they got moved.
But again, that
yeah.
goes back to what I explained earlier. The governor does not have jurisdiction to play immigration and divide the people that cross that border, whether they're here legally or quote unquote illegally. The governor can't take that stand, because the moment that he does, the federal government will come down and say, you can't play immigration.
Yeah, another big problem that you don't hear the news discussing with regards to the immigrants is the huge burden that that's putting on our educational system.
It's massive.
This information comes directly from FAIR. This is a great source to be on top of exactly what's happening with the migrants that are coming into this country. The U.S. spends $78 billion yearly to educate 1 in 10 students with limited English proficiency. And this is as of 2020, okay? Those that have entered since 2021 are not even reflected in these numbers.
No.
$78 billion. There are only 370,000 teachers who are qualified to deal with these students. So there's an additional 76,000 teachers that will be needed during the next 5 years if this continues
at this rate. Yes.
Exactly, in order to just deal with this situation. In California and Texas alone, you're looking at over 1 million limited English proficiency students. It's unbelievable.
So we're creating a crisis, and we're creating a blockage for people to be able to either integrate or even take that knowledge and take it back to their mother country, which is something that I can't believe that we're going to be spending all of this money, but yet we will not develop a trade agreement.
Exactly. We need trade agreements. We need, because we did say that we wanted to speak about solutions. We need trade agreements. We need direct investment from corporations with the people. There are plenty of entrepreneurs all over our hemisphere. We need direct engagement. The other thing that is very desperately needed and will help people to actually come in legally is a type of employer database where the employers, for instance, such as myself, I own an upholstery shop. I have a very hard time finding employees. What could be better for me than to be able to go into a government website where I could go in and I could put the job opening that I have previously probably put out all over social media, in the paper. I mean, I've already done my effort to locate the employees here. I have been unsuccessful. How great if I could go into a government database where I could go in and I could put my job opening, and people in other countries can actually see the job opening and apply for it. This is the United States of America. There's no reason why we have to function like everybody else. I think that our embassies need to have a little more engagement with the local people in the countries where we are representing ourselves.
At the very least, we need to have more transparency. I mean, I mentioned on the last podcast talking with a coworker on a remote call after discussing some business related to a project, just casually talking, and how he said he chose Canada because he just found out that the immigration process was clearer, simpler, and easier. You get all sorts of conflicting information. Well, like I said, even if you do give all the right information, you aren't guaranteed entry. Maria also pointed out that one person's application got torn straight in half.
Mm-hmm. Somebody that qualified to to be able to have a 10-year laser visa, a tourist visa to come to the United States.
But we're not even talking about just people in Latin America.
Mhm.
I personally know people, a Canadian. I know someone who's from England, and they may come here on a work permit,
Mm-hmm.
but logistically, if for some reason that ends, they're put into situations where they overstay their visas because our immigration department doesn't either renew the visa or find a way of working with them. They have to leave the country to be able to maybe come back. I mean, these are assets that we have, people that actually have paid taxes, and we can't seem to simplify the system so that we can have these people renew their visa
Yeah.
or anything.
So we need to be a little more focused on solutions and less focused on the problems that we create, because these are all self-inflicted.
Yeah.
We desperately need immigration reform, and it's very sad that neither party wants to work towards that, because they are not just hurting the people that want to come, they're hurting taxpayers, they're hurting American people. We are not controlling our borders. We're not controlling the human trafficking, the drug trafficking. Right now, the issue with fentanyl is an absolute disaster. You know, it's an
deadly.
epidemic.
But-
It's horrible. It's deadly, and we're not addressing these issues. And I think that immigration laws should remain the same no matter who's in office. I mean, this situation where, one guy comes in and he wants to build a wall, and the other guy comes in and he's like,
Please come, all
carte
of you.
blanche. I mean, this is wrong. We have laws, and we have to work according to our Constitution. I'm going to give you another example of something that's currently happening. Under President Biden, $5.8 trillion is being requested for the 2023 budget. $5.8 trillion. No wonder they need so many IRS agents.
Well, speaking of IRS agents, you and I have talked about that, and I think that most of the viewership will agree. We actually need people to be processing a lot of these people, or somehow keeping security at the border rather than IRS.
Well,
agents.
and we need more judges and more clerks.
Yes, exactly.
We need
Or attorneys.
I mean, imagine being in this country for 7 months, even a year, without an employment authorization card, when there's plenty of jobs to be had. And then they want to condemn the employers that hire the undocumented. But what do they want? The undocumented to become an eternal burden on taxpayers? And it's not like they're given money that they can actually live on.
No.
We're talking about $300 or $350 a month. No one can live with that kind of money these
No.
days. Even if you have food stamps, what, another $300 in food stamps? The whole situation is ridiculous.
It's absurd.
And this is one of the things that they want. They would like to promote universal legal representation for the unoccupied, the undocumented alien children. I mean, where does it stop?
Yeah.
It's
If
insanity.
their parents could
And
work,
but this is the problem. The Sixth Amendment guarantees an American citizen that they can have access to free counsel when to a public defender in a criminal case. But immigration is a civil procedural case.
yes, it is.
Well,
So it is something that does not even qualify legally. It's unconstitutional, okay, to solve it in this manner. So
Well, I don't think that they're solving anything, Maria. I think that they're just creating an overwhelming push and just pushing people into our border. And there's no actual structure for
to recap, before we go, we would like to see a national database for employers to post so that people can actually apply to come and work here legally. That's number
from
one.
day one.
Number two, we would like to see an immigration system that works, that once people are processed at our border, they are granted, even if it's just temporary a work permit so that they can come in and work and not become a burden to taxpayers.
Right.
We would like to see our embassies and our consulates more engaged with the people in the different countries so that people understand that we care, that we hear their needs, and perhaps we can also figure out ways of keeping them in their countries
Exactly.
unless we need them for employment purposes.
Yes.
So there are many ways to find solutions, and we need our politicians on all sides of the aisle to focus on solutions instead of some people saying, hey, yes, we welcome you, and we welcome you to a struggle, not we welcome you to actually help you. We're welcoming you to a struggle. And then the other side saying, oh no, these people are bad, they're breaking our laws.
They need to be deported.
Exactly.
But-
we need to
Okay, well-
simplify this situation.
I want to, before we do close though, I want to bring this back very briefly to the Venezuelan issue, because I have known some people who have had some mixed opinions about this. Some of them do seem to like this move that DeSantis made, but some other people, like for instance, Jose Colina of VEPEX, which stands for the Organization of Political Persecuted Venezuelans in Exile, he said, we reject the decision of Florida State Governor Ron DeSantis to send Venezuelan migrants to Massachusetts. It is an inconsistent decision taking into account the knowledge he has about the Venezuelan situation and the pronouncements he has made in this regard. Unfortunately, this situation is occurring due to the failures that the immigration system has had in receiving immigrants entering the border. Failures in the immigration system have allowed governors to focus on issues where they have no jurisdiction whatsoever. In the coming days, we will send a communication to the Immigration Service to take some measures regarding the Venezuelan migrants who have been entering the border where there is no filter to prevent people from entering the United States who may threaten their safety. Now, one thing I did want to say is we've already made this opinion clear. DeSantis can't pick and choose.
Mhm.
That being said, I honestly think that Jose Colina has a very valid complaint and he has a very valid emotional response to this. While this situation may have been necessary just to get people to wake up, on the other hand, your people are being used as political pawns. And, that's being used as a buzzword, but it's absolutely right. What I want to do and invite Jose Colina specifically to do is to contact us at the Cuban Heritage Foundation and see how we can work with you. But on the other hand, in the meantime, I would like to encourage you to do something else. I would like to encourage you to focus all this anger and all this frustration primarily on the Biden administration, not as much on Ron DeSantis in the meantime, although I do encourage you to try to contact him and address your frustrations with this if you haven't already. But in the meantime, we want to show you some support and we want to reach out a hand to you.
And before we go, I want to go back to the illegal border crossing markers. This is live. Right now, we're at 5,120 for the day.
380 more
Yes,
from when the podcast started live.
exactly. When
In just
we
a little
started,
over an hour.
So a little over an hour, we've had 380 illegal crossings. It's unbelievable. By midnight tonight, this number will be at 7,000 for sure.
Yeah, there's
So-
no country that can
Yeah.
support this kind of madness.
We want to thank you for joining us today on Way to Go, and we hope to see you again next week. Thank you for being with us.